We might just have to go without confirmation.
Good evening, everyone. This is the City of Garden City Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on Wednesday, May 15th, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. We have Commissioners Smith, Wild, Shepherd, and Brown present. And Hannah, we have confirmed we didn't get any response from the guest on Zoom, so we will continue at this time. And I will call the meeting to order and we will say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, this commission provides for a public hearing for quasi judicial administrative land use decisions, appeals, and legislative actions specific to land use regulations. The format for the public hearing will follow the following procedures for each application: presentation by the applicant, city staff report, public testimony, rebuttal testimony from the applicant, discussion of the hearing among the commission members, and decision. If you wish to give public testimony, there are some general rules to abide by. No person shall be permitted to speak at the public hearing until the person is recognized by the chairperson to do so. Thank you. The commission will not address those who speak out of order. If you have questions, you can ask them during your turn for public testimony, and the applicant can respond to them during the rebuttal, or the commission can ask the questions of staff during their discussion. Sign-up sheets are available, and if you wish to give public testimony, please provide those. We have received some public hearing sign-up sheets, so if there's any other members from the public who would like to sign in, please do so. No person shall be permitted to testify at the public hearing unless such person has signed their full name and written their residential address on the sign-up sheets. Clearly state your name and address into the microphone at the podium. Changes to the agenda. We have one item that has been changed. That is item A, SUB FY 2024-0002, Pointe Pierce Villas. It's combined preliminary and final plat by Teran K Mitchell, requesting a 12 residential lot and 1 common lot subdivision to be processed as a planned unit development. This is being moved to the date certain of June 18th, 2024. No other items on the changes to the agenda. Is that correct, staff? At this point?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6, the consent agenda. We have one item, and that is the approval of the minutes from the April 17th, 2024 hearing. Do we have any items for discussion on the consent agenda? All right, hearing none, seeing none, then I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Wild.
Approval of the consent agenda consisting of the minutes from April 17th, 2024, as well as or the same motion to move SUBFY 2024-2 Pierce Villas to a date certain June 18, 2024.
Thank you. I have a motion from Commissioner Wild.
I would second.
I have a second from Commissioner Brown. Any further deliberation? Hearing none, we'll put this to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those no, the ayes have it. All right, now on to new business. We have one item for a public hearing. Item A, CUPFY 2024-007, conditional use permit. David Daniel and Cleary Building Corp. is requesting a conditional use for storage at 209 West 38th Street, Ada County, parcel R273451141, located in the C2 General Commercial Zoning District. Again, the format for the public hearing will follow the following procedures. There will be a presentation by the applicant that will be limited to 15 minutes. Again, please state your name and address when you approach the podium. A report by city staff will then be presented. We will have a public hearing. The individual testimony for the public hearing will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Rebuttal testimony will be allowed by the applicant. We will close the public hearing. There will be a discussion among the commission members, and then there will be a decision. We will now hear from the applicant. And again, for the record, please state your name and address at the podium. The floor is yours, sir.
Good evening, Commission. My name is David Daniel with Cleary Building Corporation, 326 East Franklin Road in Meridian, Idaho. We're looking to add a 30 by 42 building to store a transit bus that they use at the limousine service located at 209 38th Street. It's for Showcase Limousine. And they're trying to get it in out of the weather. And they cannot get it into the building that is currently there. So we're trying to create another parking place for it to get it protected. There's no water going to be added in this. They're not going to be doing surfaces of the vehicle, any of the vehicles on the property. They take those elsewhere. The only thing they do is clean the insides of the vehicles. They also take them elsewhere and wash the vehicles. There'll be electrical in there. That's it. We've reviewed the conditions, and I've got to consult with the owner of the property for their approvals on all of the conditions. Unfortunately, they're out of town currently. But other than that, I'm open to discuss. There's a couple items I would like to address once we go through the conditions.
And if you'd like to discuss those with the commission now, that'll be appropriate. So then we could hear what staff has to say, and we could potentially ask the questions of staff as well. So if you wouldn't mind going ahead and going through the conditions and what you're looking for.
The ones that are in question basically is number one, the fencing along the south end of the property. And granted, yes, I understand that there is chain link fence all the way across surrounding this, which has been there for years and no longer supposed to be there anymore. Where the building is, I'm going to change this a little bit. So I'll address with her, with the owner on the chain link fencing removal and replacement. I'm sure she's going to be wanting to talk to the other owners of the property surrounding to find out if they can split whatever, figure out how that's going to work. And validate that it is on her property or their property. Will that matter? Would be the question to you guys on whose properties it actually pointed on. Is that where the responsibility, does that still fall on her doing improvements on her property? If it's not on her property, that's actually. I know it's a sticky spot, but that would be a question that's going to be up.
Sure, Mr. Daniel, our staff is prepared to answer that question, and I believe has that ready as part of the presentation.
Okay. The question that I will also ask is, it was brought up that landscape buffer along the south side of the property as well. There's currently a 5,000 square foot building sitting there that's within, I believe, 10 feet of the fence. Is that going to have to be landscaped in there? Because that's an extremely tight area to try to landscape something in between a fence and a building and make it functional back there and be able to service and maintain. Can that be considered as not having to do that? The other aspect is behind the new building, it'll be this approximately same distance, the same issue. That would be my only consideration. The request is that area is not going to have to be landscaped, and we can do the remaining section that is open, that it's just all gravelly. Other than that, I mean, that's the two biggest issues that I see running into.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Daniel. Any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Brown?
Mr. Chairman, I have some questions, but it sounds to me like the gist of the question, I have questions about the fencing and about the landscaping requirements. But it sounds to me like I will want to wait until after Hannah has given her briefing, and so I will address them under the rebuttal. But I do want to ask with regard to the landscaping. Part of the requirements in the landscaping are there because apparently the landscaping that was required to be put in when it was originally developed in 2005. And I'm presuming that you weren't involved with it then
No,
at that time. It has been, let's say, apparently allowed to deteriorate or been replaced. So the site is no longer compliant even with those requirements, let alone the new requirements. So will be prompted by the CU conditional use permit that's being requested. Were you aware of that?
no, but
Did you notice
can I
that?
clarify, are you talking the landscaping that exists out front or the landscaping anywhere else in the property?
The landscaping in the front and also the landscaping that was required along that southern boundary.
Okay.
Between
No, I
that, it's
was not
also,
aware of that.
it's along the same side of where the fence is an issue. So you might want to, well, I think all are going to want to listen to what Hannah has to say about it, and then I will have some other questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Any other questions?
No, Mr. Chair.
I have a couple questions for you. In relation to one of the conditions is regarding a pathway from the sidewalk to the front of the building. Are there any concerns with putting in some sort of painted pathway or some sort of identification?
No, that's simple to do.
And the condition for the bike?
No problem.
Okay. And so really, just to make sure that I'm hearing what you're saying, it's really the landscape buffer and the fencing and maybe it's more about where that starts and stops and some of the specifics of it. When you're referring to the landscaping that you have an issue with, are you referring to the landscaping on both the north and the south side, or only the north side that's adjacent to the building itself?
Just on the south side that's adjacent to the building that runs between the fence and the building right there. That's
Okay.
the only area in all of the building I've done, that's always been a massive issue that we've dealt with. And it's a failure point because there's no really good way to surface it back there or maintain it.
And then, so landscaping on the opposite side that's adjacent to the residence, there's no problem there. It looks like there's a drive aisle that goes to the rear of the building and it would be along the boundary line on that location.
And I apologize. So on the north side is between the building, the south side is
Right.
the other one where
Yep.
that existing residence is.
Mhm.
If that's required, then we'll have to figure out how to change the drive and entry into there, because that's gonna
Okay.
eat up that portion as well.
Okay. That's all I have. One more time, any other questions for the applicant? All right. Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
We'll now hear from staff. Ms. Beal.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and the rest of the commissioners. This is conditional use permit 2024-0007. It is located at 209 West 38th Street. The applicant is requesting a conditional use permit for the expansion of an existing use. A previous conditional use permit and design review was approved in 2005 for the use of a garage for showcase limousine. The use entailed the storage of vehicles for a limousine service, which with the construction of a new building for 5 vehicle bays and a small office. The purpose of this conditional use permit is to allow for the expansion of that use and reclassification of the zoning use term to vehicle rental. Only because the use of garage is not defined in our code anymore. A conditional use permit is required when a current conditional use seeks to expand beyond the parameters of the initial approval. In this case, the applicant is seeking to expand by proposing a new building for the storage of a small transit bus. When not in use, along with cold storage for items associated with the business. The business is to remain Showcase Limousine. There are a few code compliance issues as noted in the staff report, and there are drafted conditions of approval that address all of these non-compliance issues. Items that do need to be discussed here today, as the applicant and the commission already discussed a little bit, but it's in regard to the prohibited chain link fencing on site, the pedestrian accessibility, the landscaping, and the bike parking. And I will pull up the property just for ease of reference. So when referencing the aerial, and I'll share it on Zoom as well. The staff report oftentimes refers to the northern property boundary line as this property boundary line. It's technically more of the northeastern property boundary line, and in regards to the perimeter landscaping in discussion, this is the southern property boundary line as referenced in the staff report. Since this is a conditional use permit, we need to discuss the use specifically. And we do that within the 8.2C section of Garden City Code. And this is 8.2C 42 for vehicle rental. This section of code refers to vehicle rental being appropriate along Glenwood, Chinden, and State Street, and not appropriate for local streets. However, the verbiage within this section of code is not mentioning shall, it is mentioning may. So it's not prohibiting vehicle rental on local streets, but it is saying that it might not be appropriate. And moving on to the code compliance issues of 8.2C 42, there's the discussion of the chain link fencing. So this section of code mentions for vehicle rentals use specifically, no chain link fencing or barbed wire should be visible from the public right of way. So West 38th Street is the public right of way, and I'm just using street view, and that the applicant did submit some site photos that are current for the record. The chain link fencing has blue slats within it along the northern property boundary line, and it does go all the way back to the rear of the property. And then the same fence is visible from the public right of way, this area, the gate, which leads from the drive to the parking lot, as well as on the southern property boundary line. So that is not compliant with the 8.2C 42 section of code. There is a condition drafted that would require the removal of all chain link fencing, and that's in relation to 8.4A section of code. However, it is up to the commission to determine how much of that chain link fencing is appropriate, because the commission has that authority via the conditional use permit process. You can determine none of it is required to be removed, or all of it or portions thereof. And if I would say that if the chain link fencing is allowed to remain, it would not be in compliance with the 8.2C 42 section of code. Moving on to the pedestrian connection, there lacks a separated pedestrian connection from the public sidewalk to the primary entrance of the building. There is a condition drafted in the decision document to require that this is made, whether it is a painted pathway or a concrete or asphalt pathway. That is up to the commission to decide. But it seems like the applicant is in agreement with that condition. And I will just skip to the landscaping portion of the staff report. So in looking at the previous conditional use permit from 2005, the site was required to have 5% of the site landscaped, which is it is supposed to be maintained throughout the duration of the use. Landscape plans were not submitted as part of this packet, and therefore I wasn't able to calculate accurately what the provided landscaping is. Therefore, there's just a general condition. Of that required landscaping, 70% of that needs to be vegetated material at maturity. The previous conditional use permit in 2005 required that only 50% of that required landscaping needed to be vegetated, but as this is a new conditional use permit, essentially, we have to go with current code standards. The street trees are compliant. They only needed 3, they have 3. The perimeter landscaping, however, has been consistent since 2005, and it essentially states the same as what current code says, and perimeter landscaping is required between a commercial use and an adjacent residential use. So the adjacent use to the south is a residential property. It is a home, though it does appear to have a shop/garage area towards the rear of their property. That is via permits, in our system, it is a residential garage and shop. It is not a commercial garage and shop. So the property at 211 West 38th is residential, thus requiring the perimeter landscaping along that entire property boundary line. The exception to perimeter landscaping is that code requires 10-foot width of perimeter landscaping, but we have allowed for 5 feet in previous applications, and so you could be consistent with that. It does appear that there is some perimeter landscaping up towards the front of the building, as it was installed as part of the previous conditional use permit. And it does appear to be a little overgrown right now. Sorry if I'm making anyone dizzy. But if you go back in the street view records, it's clearly installed, and right now it's just fully mature and kind of growing how it wants to. So that section of the property is compliant with perimeter landscaping. However, the rear portion of the property does not appear to have the required perimeter landscaping. So I hope I answered all of the questions, but I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Veal. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Brown?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I have some questions about that. Yes, please leave that, Hannah, leave that view up there. Mr. Chairman, as you can see, there's the gate there where those 2 cars are parked, and I presume, is that gate chain link fence?
Yes.
With slats, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brown, that is correct as far as what the site photos showed in street view.
And along that would be the north side that we're looking at. The south side is on the other side, is that correct?
Correct.
So you can see the chain link fence that's down along there. It has blue colored slats in it, is that correct?
This is correct.
You said in the staff report, and I want to make sure I'm saying what I read, that the previous application in 2005, which apparently was a DEV 2005 number 302, it required that fence to be the south one, no, that wouldn't be this fence. That would be the fence that's on the other side, but you can see part of it also. Be a line of a solid or closed vision design. In 2005, did chain link fencing with slats in it fulfill that requirement?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brown, I do not know at this point without looking into historical code.
The next question. We can see, and you pointed out that on the, this would be the north side where that you can see that they did have some perimeter landscaping they put in, as you said, it probably needs to be maintained better. Apparently it went to where that gate is. On the other side, which is one at issue, it's really because it's the side that has, that's next to the residential property, if I understand it correctly. Is there equivalent to that on that other side or not? Do we know?
Chair or Commissioner Brown, equivalent as in a condition of the previous conditional use permit or equivalent as in?
Was there perimeter landscaping that along there where you can see that blue fence there?
Mhm.
Yes, there, that picture answers my question.
So Commissioner
So-
Brown, just
There.
for clarification, apologies for interrupting. Just to make sure that I'm clear on the orientation. So where the mobile home is no longer a mobile home park, correct? And that's vacant.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's
So
correct.
the residential portion is actually on the south side. So where the trucks are over to the right.
Oh, well, thank you. Then I had it all confused. But that picture answers my question. There was, well, it's not landscaped very much, but there's grass alongside that fence, and I presume that's at least 5 feet. So that answered my question. But that obviously it terminates where the building is. And as the gentleman pointed out, the building is quite close to that fence line. So I think that answered that question.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brown, I just want to clarify, I did not mark the northern property boundary line as needing perimeter landscaping, despite them having it at least in the front, because the mobile home park is vacated and it is not a residentially zoned
I
property.
understand that. I understand that. And I appreciate that. But the way that the document you drafted, the draft of a decision document,
Mhm.
if we leave it like it is, it requires all the chain link fencing to be removed. That would be both sides. The chain link fencing that would be on the gate, because the gate, it says the same rules for the gate. And the chain link fencing that's on the back. All of that, if we leave it like it is, it would have to be removed. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. You answered my questions.
Any other questions for staff?
Chairman, I have just a few clarifying questions on the draft staff report and mostly just checking my observation here. So it appears that the sidewalk that we are talking about appears on page 7, section 2. And I know that you said that it could be multiple different types. It could be a walkway or markings. The way it's written now, it appears to me that that gives the applicant discretion on how they want to arrange that. Would we be required to make any additional findings beyond that, or is this just essentially leave it open as long as it complies with what's listed here in A, B, and C?
So it would be condition number 2 under prior to occupancy. A direct, comfortable and safe pedestrian connection from the public sidewalk system to the parking or in the parking area to the structure. And the subsections of A, B, and C are taken directly from code. And that is an interpretive condition subject to our discussion here today. And if the commission feels comfortable with the applicant providing what the conditions require. However, that is met, then it can remain.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And then as regarding the landscaping in the prior to occupancy section, looking at 3C1, perimeter landscaping area shall be at least 5 feet wide. Is that what you were referring to when you said that it's 10, but we've previously done 5, and so the proposed additional requirements, that's the 5 that you were talking about right there.
That is correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other
Sure.
questions? Commissioner Wild?
3A, a minimum of 5% of the gross site area shall be landscaped areas. What percentage of the property is landscaped currently? So what I'm getting at is you've kind of walked us through where it's landscaped and it stops at the gate. My question is, with the grass strip on the back side of the property, with that landscaping on the front, maybe even the street trees area, does it get to 5%?
Commissioner Wild, I do not have the exact calculations because the landscape plan was not submitted.
Right.
And I did not perform like a GIS calculation. I do not anticipate it meeting the required 5% currently. Just given rough eyeball guessing. And I say that because that 5% cannot include the perimeter or setback landscaping.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Um,
Smith? Oh.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question.
Commissioner Shepherd?
Just following up from Commissioner Brown's question, in the prior to occupancy conditions number 4A, all chain link fencing, like the word all chain link fencing should be removed from the property. Could we, like have just the front, the chain link fencing that's actually visible from the street removed? And is that like a possibility that we can consider, or does it have to stay as all?
Yeah,
all-
Commissioner Shepherd, yes, it is up to the commission to decide how much of the chain link fencing needs to be removed, if any. But that is where I also stated earlier that any of the chain link fencing visible from the public right of way per that 82C42 section of code is not compliant.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shepherd, any further questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Veal, I do have some questions, and just following up on that 8-2C-42. You said chain link fence visible from the right of way,
Correct.
and so if we were looking back at the street view, we could say that looking at the south side, the north side, there's visible fence. And really, once you hit that gate and the building beyond that, would be reasonable not to say you can see the fence beyond.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. And then following up on the fence, if the owner was to submit an affidavit claiming that they don't own the fence, would they be required to remove the fence?
Mr. Chairman, if an affidavit of non-ownership is submitted to the city, then they do not have to remove the fence as it is not theirs.
Okay, thank you. One other question regarding the landscaping and following up on Commissioner Wild's question regarding the 5%. And so if memory serves me, there was photos submitted with the application packet that showed that the grass is no longer there and it's now rock.
That is correct, yes, and you can see it from the aerial. a
And
little
is
bit.
that compliant?
Mr. Chairman, it is not compliant, as there is that sentence in code for landscaping that all required landscaping needs to consist of 70% vegetated material at maturity.
And based on my understanding of the previous C for condition for approval, they were required to install 50%. Not 70%, but still install vegetative material and maintain it, correct?
This is correct.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Ms. Veal. Anything else from the commission? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Anna. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. All right, now we will open up the public hearing. I do have sign-in sheets. One from the applicant's representative, so we did hear from you earlier, and you'll have a chance for rebuttal after the close of the public hearing. I do have another public hearing sign-up sheet, but I believe it's for the discussion item on CUP 20240006. Corey Perry, you're not wanting to discuss this matter, okay? Is there anybody else from the public that is here today to testify on this item? All right, hearing none, we will close the public hearing and we will provide an opportunity for the applicant to answer any additional questions, to provide any additional comments that were raised. So, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Commissioner. The only thing I would address is I would like to request if it's in consideration of the panel is the street view fencing that would reduce the extensive cost. If she finds that it is owned by her, and then, you know, obviously the gate is going to have to be replaced. But to replace the entire thing would be extensive cost against my client. The other items are all code compliancy, so I'll make it happen.
All right, thank you, sir. Any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Brown.
Yes, I do. I think you would agree then that let's say that we were thinking from what you can see from the road, as was pointed out by Commissioner Wild, it's pretty much up to where the gate is and on the one side where the building is. And that is also where at one time there was some perimeter landscaping, which apparently has been abandoned and including in the front replaced by pebbles. Let's just say this, for instance, that with regard to the landscaping issue, would you see it as reasonable to restore the perimeter landscaping per the code that's required up to the gate, being that is also what you can see from the road and would kind of, and the same thing to address the problem of the fencing, assuming that they find, and I presume that they will find that this fencing is associated with this property. And if that be the case, if we were able to say that we would have that fencing replaced and then the other, would that be a reasonable way of approaching it if we were able to do that?
Mr. Chairman, I would see that would be reasonable, yes.
All right, thank you. That's the question I have.
Commissioner Brown. Mr. Chipper.
I do have a question about the irrigation on the property, because it was green grass and now it's rocks. Are you able to water?
I would have to validate that. I'm not sure if they took the irrigation out or not. That was long prior to my starting in on this project, so I'd have to validate that. Obviously, if we put vegetation in there, we would have to make sure that there is sprinkler system in there to maintain it.
Any further questions? Thank you, Commissioner Shepherd. Any other questions from the commission? Mr.
Chairman.
Smith.
Thank you. Regarding the landscaping around the perimeter, you had said that 10 feet of landscaping would essentially be impossible around the side of the building where it's really tight. What about the 5 feet option? Is there enough?
On the backs, you're talking on the north side of the
Correct.
property.
There
I'd have to go
5
back
feet?
out again and run a measurement on there. My building is spaced 10 feet in. And we're inside of the other building. And I believe it's at a 5 foot setback from that property line.
Okay. So if.
Yeah,
we-
yeah, I believe that is a 5-foot setback all the way for the length of the 100-foot building.
Okay, so if we require that to be landscaped, it's basically landscape from the end of the building to the property.
Right, that is correct.
Thank
But that is also, I believe that property is a commercial property, is that not correct? And we're only talking on landscaping on the south side, is that, unless I misunderstand?
you.
So what I've heard from staff is that on the north side, it's vacant and it's not in a residentially zoned area, so we're not considering that the side that needs to have any
Okay.
landscaping. It's purely on the south
south
side
side.
that's adjacent to the residence.
Are there any spacing issues on that, on the
I
south side?
think we can make the 5-foot work. We'd have to adjust the gate a little bit, which adjustments can be made.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Daniel, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we will close the public hearing. The matter is now before the commission. We are a decision-making body for the CUP. So discussion on this matter, Commissioner Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My take on hearing this application. And, well, first I want to thank you for bringing this application to us today. I'm in support of putting the extra building on there, which is what we're talking about, but in terms of like all of the things to bring it into compliance. I definitely think that the rock needs to be removed and replaced with vegetative material. And it's hard to like, not knowing the percentage that's already there because the landscaping plans weren't giving. I think in order to get to the required percentage, just by looking at the pictures that were up there, I'm thinking I would be okay with like adding large decorative pots, like flower pots around the entrance to the building or something like that, just to give it more of an aesthetic in the front. And I do think that it seems to me like the fence probably is owned by the owner just because it's the same blue slat all the way around. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but I would be, you know, based on cost, I think I would be in favor of just making the fence in the front from the street visible angle, not chain link, and having that fence in the front that we saw that was like the gate fence be like something else, like a wooden fence, not chain link. And then as far as landscaping on the other side, I'd just maybe clean that up and just keep most of the landscaping in the front. I don't think it's worth trying to make you landscape between the fence on the north side, between the building and the fence that we saw in that picture. That's amazing. But that's what I have. With that, I would be in favor of approving the application.
Thank you, Commissioner Shepherd. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much agree with Commissioner Shepherd, and to put it in sort of shorthand. This is, first of all, let's address the fence. And I'm assuming that they will find that the fence is on a property line. It's on the property line, and in that sense, at least half of it is the responsibility of this owner. And so I would, with regard to the fence, I would limit the removal of the chain link to the gate, where the gate and the building line is. Let the chain link that's got blue slats in it remain behind that and on the back. We could perhaps designate, I haven't looked at it, so I don't know, that if that needs to be renovated in any way, in other words, most likely if it's been in there since 2005, some of the slats are shot. But put something in there that they would have to restore the visual part that's in that. But it can remain, the chain link can remain behind the building and where that fence, where the gate is, and that would have to be replaced. It doesn't have to be wood. All we have to do is say it would be in compliance with current code. And then there's wrought iron, there's all kinds of things that they can do. that, and the staff will be capable of deciding if it meets the criteria. With regard to the landscaping, I very much agree. I don't think in that 5 foot, I'm assuming just looking at I did go look on this on Google World, and that appears to me that the gentleman is probably correct. That building is probably on the 5 foot setback line and not 10 feet. And I cannot see requiring them to put landscaping on this 5 foot, essentially it's behind the building. That would be expensive, and it probably wouldn't survive very long. And that would be a waste, but so I think what they should be required to do is essentially restore the landscaping forward of the building that was there. At one time, when you look at the one picture, at one time, that probably was pretty decent, and it probably met the requirements. We shouldn't make it be 10 feet, should be 5 feet on each side, but restore that to pretty much where it was. And also including in the front. At the front at one time, which is now apparently pea gravel, but at one time that was sod with those flowering trees in it. And so I think it should word that ought to be replaced, that ought to be fixed. We shouldn't require any landscaping behind the building. And with regard to the percentage, I suspect we could probably write something that say that whatever results from if they restored that, that's what they're required to have. And with that, I would be in favor of approving this.
You, Commissioner Brown, Commissioner Wild.
I'm mostly in agreement with the commissioners, with perhaps one little difference, and that is the visible from the street fence removal. I like the idea of the gate being removed and maybe replaced with something other than chain link that does meet code. But there's a long stretch of slatted fence right up against the street, right up against the sidewalk, that is visible, and I think that should be removed back to the building.
Well, that's what's sort of my intent.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I misspoke. No, that I agree. You and I are 100% agreement.
All right.
I think that the chain link should all the way back to the front face of the
Okay.
building, and where
Gotcha.
that
Okay.
should be replaced with code compliant
Understood.
fencing.
I agree with that.
The only behind the building would be chain link allowed.
Right. So I think then I'm probably fully in agreement with my fellow commissioners, and I absolutely believe that at a minimum, that front area should be restored to vegetated landscaped area instead of rocks.
Thank you, Commissioner Wild, Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with everything that's been said. I think that an approval is appropriate based on these conditions. I think at this point, with the notes that I've taken, we would be amending 2 of those conditions, and I think all the other conditions are appropriate. And it sounds like the applicant is willing to comply.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. I agree with the fellow commissioners as well. And just to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, removal or replacement of the fence up until the building, so they could choose to remove it, which would be also code compliant, correct? Or replace it with something that is code compliant. And then the gate needs to be code compliant, and then restoring the front, which includes the street side as well as the side setbacks. So I'm in favor of the approval for the CUP with those conditions as we discussed. Any further discussion on this matter? All right, hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
Happy to make an attempt,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Smith,
Give our new person an opportunity.
Feel free to interrupt me. All right, I move that we approve with conditions CUP FY 2024-0007. With the following findings located in the draft staff report with finding 1. In approval, finding 2, in approval, finding 3 and 4. Also in approval and moving to the conditions listed starting on page 6, potential conditions for approval. I would recommend or move that we amend under prior occupancy, section 3A, which requires a minimum of 5% of the gross area to be landscaped, that we amend that with a provision to restore the current vegetation within the setbacks, removal of the pea gravel in the front of the building to be replaced with vegetative material. And if that condition is satisfied, waive the ultimate 5% total that was originally included in this condition. And in the same section 4A, that states that all chain link fencing shall be removed from the property, replace that with a removal of all chain link fence and the gate that is visible from the public right of way, which would not include the chain link fencing along the back of the building.
And any replacement fencing to be code compliant.
And any replacement fencing to be code compliant.
I have a motion from Commissioner Smith. Thank you very much. Do I have a second? I have a second from Commissioner Wilds. It has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this matter?
I have a further thing, Mr. Chair, on 3C with the perimeter landscaping required along the southern property boundary line. That's the one that's got the house with the like garage, like the shop behind it, right? Because we're not gonna have them landscape the entire perimeter of that, correct? Or regardless of the side, south and north, they're not, they only have to landscape up to the fence line. Or not the fence line, the building line, sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner Shepherd. Commissioner Smith, would you like to revise your original motion to address item 3C?
Yes, Mr. Chair, see. Yes, let's also amend 3C I, which discusses perimeter landscaping 5 feet wide measured from the property line to the interior of the lot required to be landscaped would not include the area that surrounds the current buildings on the property, which I believe is not required by code, according to Ms. Beal.
So just for clarification and
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
of the motion, so we're saying that on the south side property line behind the gate, there is no additional perimeter landscaping along that boundary line. So we would be removing the perimeter landscaping beyond the gate to the east on the south side of the property line.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. Commissioner Brown.
what I envisioned was we would have perimeter landscaping 5 feet wide on both sides to where the front face of the building was.
Yep.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is
Wording to that effect.
to the
Behind the
east,
gate.
yep,
Yeah.
anything to the east
Yeah,
of the
Yeah.
gate along the south property line.
no, none of that. All went forward to the street on
Yes.
both sides. There, and on the other side.
Yep.
On the other side also. Yeah, right there.
Yep, and on the street
Okay.
side. All right. Can we get another motion amending this?
Or I'll second the amended motion to include that,
Okay,
There you go.
because I think staff has that written down.
okay. Thank you.
That's
I have a
good.
second from Commissioner Wilds on the amended motion. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none. With all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel, staff, for that item on the agenda. We will now move into item 8, which is a clarification of conditions of approval of CUP FY 2024-0006. And with that, I'll turn it over to staff, Ms. Thornborough.
Chairman, members of the commission, thank you very much. Just to start off, I want to note that this item isn't a public hearing and it is a previously approved hearing. So tonight isn't intended to change any conditions, but rather just clarify a condition and the commission's intent. If you'll recall, last month, the application CUP fiscal year 2024 number 6, there was quite a bit of discussion about the landscaping that would be required. There was a hardship that was determined by the commission in requiring the full code requirement of the 5% because of the existing layout and of the area. Condition 11 A, there was also a reduction in street trees. And so condition 11A allowed for substitution as allowed by code of the street trees for shrubs. But code requires a 1 to 10 substitution. And the applicant has indicated that goes against the commission's allowance for a reduction in the overall landscaping. And they do understand that a 1-to-1 allowance, a 1 tree to 1 shrub isn't the commission's intent, but they have indicated requiring that 1 to 10, or I believe it's 90 shrubs, is that 90 shrubs it's in conflict with the allowance that the commission had. And so staff is looking for clarification if that allowance was intended to also pertain to that the shrub substitution, and if so, what does that look like?
So Jenna, just for clarity, the discussion, we're not going to be making a motion. It's just our overall understanding of what the discussion was.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, this is not, has not been properly noticed to be able to make changes to the conditions. It would be just a clarification. And if it was intended to be a 1 to 10 code compliance, then should the applicant wish to change that, they would need to go back through the process.
Thank you. And just for formality's sakes, we do have a sign-up sheet on this matter, but due to the fact that it wasn't publicly noticed, we won't be hearing any public testimony, correct?
Chairman, and that is recommended.
Okay, thank you. And just to refresh my memory, the decision was to allow for the landscaping to be in planters, correct? That would be seated in front of the drive entrances and exits as a barrier. And that there would be no irrigation to those planters, but there would be some sort of contract or something else in place for the watering. Is that correct?
Chairman, that is correct.
Okay, and we're talking about 90 shrubs in those planters is what would be required?
Chairman, at the code allowance for the substitution of the street trees to shrubbery, that is correct. I believe they're shaking their head yes, and I'll look to Hannah if she knows that off the top of her head.
And there was also discussion of maybe some alternative plant material along the interior, you know, pots and stuff like that that might help, but okay, so. All right, I'll turn it over to other commissioner members, Commissioner Wild.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we spent quite a bit of time talking about this one. I don't remember every application, but this one is recent enough, I do, thank goodness. Not surprised that you need clarification from us. I think I did, Jenna, did you pull the transcript or audio of our motion and our discussion? Cause
Um,
I think I remember mentioning the 1-to-10 ratio, or at least in my mind I did. So I think I did anticipate that it would be a lot of shrubs to make up for that.
Chairman Commissioner Wild, this has come very quickly and to be able to get in front of you,
Oh, sure.
as
Okay.
the identified. And so no, the answer is no, we have not pulled the transcripts and read the transcripts yet. And also as a point of clarification, Ms. Beal has pulled the staff report and done the calculation, and it's actually not what I indicated. It's 140 shrubs that would be required. And just as
I mean, you can probably get some shrubs, but that's still.
Commissioner Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you remind me, and I was trying to dig into the code real quick, but what is the definition of shrub?
And Chairman Commissioner Smith, we don't have a definition, so we would fall back to Merriam-Webster dictionary. But really what staff does is there's a planting requirement of 2 gallons. So any sort of planting that comes in a 2-gallon or greater container.
Would it be out of compliance with the code if each individual little flower root thing counted as a shrub, or would that not be in compliance?
Chairman Commissioner Smith, I think that in exercising the code where it does talk about the shrubs being in the 2-gallon, that staff would have to look at that. And it may not come down to a number of shrubs within that. Thank you.
I tried. Thank you.
Commissioner Shepherd?
If we're not requiring, thank you, Mr. Chair, if we're not requiring automatic irrigation, it does seem like requiring 10-to-1 shrubs is a lot. So my recollection from last month isn't all here, but my notes, I have that we agreed on 3 large planters on Chinden and 2 planter boxes on 37th. Was that in place of the trees and therefore the shrubs? Because they don't have the automatic irrigation. Because I don't recall requiring a huge amount of shrubs because of the irrigation issue. And that's what you're asking for clarification on, right? Like how many we require?
Chairman Commissioner Shepherd, yes, thank you. And we are asking for clarification on that.
Commissioner Brown?
I think, I actually can think about it at some point. I thought about it, but I didn't say anything because it might have been Hannah or somebody mentioned that was in the code, that 10-for-1, but I was not thinking about that. I was thinking more like a one for, we're gonna not require trees for obvious reasons. It wouldn't be possible, and it wouldn't make sense to put trees in these planter boxes. So I was sort of in my own mind thinking that it would be a 1-for-1 subsidization. We were granting them because of the hardship. That was the basis for where we did it. You're not going to have a sprinkling system for this. So I was sort of thinking like 1-for-1, or what was a reasonable amount of shrubs in a planter box, which that depends how big they are. But I envision these planter boxes are at the most, what, I'd be 8 feet long or 6 feet long. If you had that and you had a planter box that's that long, it seems to me that a reasonable sized shrub, you're talking about 2 or 3 shrubs per planter box is the most. And that's not going to get you anywhere close to.
Depends on the size of the shrub. Again,
Yeah, well, that's correct. But if you start out at a 2-gallon shrub, okay. I don't think that it is reasonable to think that they're gonna have to put 140
Yeah.
of those out.
We don't want it to look like a nursery, right?
Well, that's right. I think we need to see some way to give guidance to the staff and say it'd be closer to 1 for 1.
So is it 14 trees that, 1 to 10, I mean, you said 140, but the 14 trees that.
Yeah, there'd be
Chairman,
14
Commissioner Wild,
shrubs.
that's correct.
Between all of them, there'd be 14 shrubs. That would be the requirement. If they think that a certain planter box could handle 2, that would be up to them, but if we just say, make it 1 for 1. The guidance that we give to the staff, make it 1 for 1, and if they want to put more shrubs in that they're voluntarily, we're not requiring it. That's what I think this. So we should say, we intended it to be 1 for 1. I can say that for me. That was what I was sort of thinking.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Looked like did you want to say something else, Commissioner
Oh.
Smith?
Mr. Chair, I was thinking, my recollection follows Commissioner Shepherd's, where I don't recall, I don't think it was, we really thought about the 1 to 10. I think our thought process was the trees would be replaced with shrubs. And I know we talked about the area where the trees would be having planter boxes, and those planter boxes would have shrubs. So if I remember our intention, I think it was not so much to substitute numbers, but to substitute type. And that would be consistent with my recollection of our motion at the time, which I don't think would require us to have an additional hearing if that is our recollection and intention, rather than changing from that general intention to a 1-to-1, I think is a much bigger shift in the code. That makes sense.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith, and that more closely aligns with my interpretation and what I intended. If we were going to require the streetscape in that, then it would be a different story, but the concession is to put them in planter boxes. And so it's a completely different application, and even trying to water that many plants would be absurd. So yeah, I don't know how we could enforce that or require it when we were saying that planter boxes with no irrigation are okay, but we have to have 140, so my recollection aligns with the rest of the council members. Any further discussion on the discussion?
Mr. Chair, does staff need us to update language to reflect our original intention, or can that be handled on staff level?
Chairman, Commissioner Smith, what we will do sometimes, we'll annotate the decision. And so you'll see that the signed decision has a footnote talking about this discussion, and we'll put this discussion in there. And I might also add, for the benefit of the commission in this discussion, for plantings to be considered vegetation. Code requires the 70%. And I think that based on this discussion, we could add the discussion about the planter boxes and as guidance to the applicant and staff, just address the 70% that's in code
And Jenna, just to make sure that we're all.
of living material. if that
And
was-
so what does that mean? So are we saying that it is 1 shrub for one of the proposed trees? So that would mean that there is 14 shrubs?
Chairman, based on the discussion that you just had, it was my understanding that it would be the planter boxes and the locations discussed. And not a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-10 or any sort of ratio. But rather it would be that it's as code defined as vegetation, so that 70% living material.
In those planter boxes?
Mhm.
Okay,
Sure.
so they would have to fill the planter boxes with 70% vegetative material and not like rocks.
Rocks,
Okay.
correct? Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for the clarification, and I think we can do that.
Apologies for the lack of clarity.
All right. Is there any other matters to discuss? Hearing none, we call the meeting adjourned. Thank you all. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. To all of the commission.